Well, let's get started. I've got 7 o'clock. My name is Geoff Harvey. I'm the president of the Hayden Lake Watershed Association, and I want to welcome you all to the Zoom meeting. I wish, like everybody else, we were at the country club where we could meet face to face, but in these times it's just not possible. This is the best we can do. It does have some constraints. Many of you had questions. And we have already relayed those to the speakers. I relayed all the questions to all the speakers because some of them overlapped, and hopefully they will incorporate those initial pre-registration questions you had into what they say. Will is also checking the chat box, I guess it is, on the Zoom. And any questions you have, you type those into that chat box. Will collect those at the end, and we will direct them to the speaker who can answer them. Unfortunately, that's a constraint we have with this type of format. First, I want to introduce the boards of both the association and the district. But before that, I do that, I kind of want to draw the difference between those two because people get confused. The Hayden Lake Watershed Association is just that. It's an association. We are basically a interest group that is advocating for the protection and enhancement of Hayden Lake and its watershed. And the watershed is very important. You'll hear that a couple times tonight because so goes the quality of the watershed, so goes the quality of our lake. The district, the Hayden Lake Watershed Improvement District, is a subdivision of the government of the state of Idaho. It's a district created under Idaho law. It charges a fee to all the private landowners. Basically, its district boundary or all the private lands in the sections that touch Hayden Lake. Fees charged a modest fee. I like to refer to mine as about a latte or two a year. Is about what it costs, and that district takes those monies and spends them on specific projects, specific actions to enhance or protect and enhance the lake. And it does a number of different functions, and I'll mention some of those as we go on. So I want to introduce the directors first. Our vice president is Jen, and if you would say hello, that will reference your box and people will see who you are.
Hello.
Our vice president is Jan Wilkins. Our treasurer is Barb Neal.
Hi there.
Will Neal is our communications director, the fellow who makes all this happen.
Hello.
Gloria Lund is probably one of the oldest acting members of the board. Gloria, say hello. Okay. Let's see, Gil Rosner.
How you doing?
And Todd Walker. I don't know if you're here or not, Todd.
Mary Ann says no.
Evidently not. The other member is Chris Meyer. So those are the members of the board of the association. The district, the chairman of the district is Steve Meyer.
Steve here.
I believe Leo Notar is traveling and not here. He's the secretary treasurer, and Pat Lund is the other board member. Pat, got to say something. Okay. Anyway, Pat is the other board member. I want to start very quickly with a state of the lake. I like to start with a state of the lake and a state of the watershed as we see it. And a lot of this comes right from the water quality monitoring that the district is doing. First, the water quality of the main body of the lake is doing very well. When I say the main body, I mean the deep portion of the lake, really south of Henry's Point. That water quality is doing very well. We have 3-4 years of data showing that. This particular year, the parameter we look at the closest is total phosphate and orthophosphate. Total phosphate's averaging 4.7, and we look at those because that's what drives algal growth which can diminish water quality. Total phosphate sitting at 4.7 micrograms per liter, which is well below the historic average of 7.5 micrograms per liter. And orthophosphate, and that's the phosphate that actually drive algal growth, it hasn't risen above detection in this year's data yet. The other good news from the monitoring on the lake is the district completed, or pretty close to completing, 3.5 years of monitoring the phosphorus loading from the south shore of the lake. And that was modeled to be a very significant input when that was done. It was done with models. The district has now actually measured that, and that number is a lot lower than we thought it was, which is good news, but obviously we still want to be careful about those inputs, but they're not nearly as large as the models, the export models had represented them to be. The dimmer news is basically in the North Arm. The district also completed this year 3 years of monitoring up there. In the North Arm, and when I say that, the area north of Henry's Point is a very different lake. It's a very shallow part of the lake. It was created by the impoundment of the lake in 1910 and some creative plugging of very fast discharging areas that discharge very rapidly to the Rathdrum Prairie Aquifer with bentonite. And so that area was very different. It was inundated in the spring and dried out in the summertime. Before 1910, after 1910, or right in that ballpark, it became part of the lake. Very different. It's shallow. It has very high phosphoruses, and both total and orthophosphate, and those are orthophosphates often measurable up there. In fact, we talk about the main lake as being phosphorus limited, the growth of algae being phosphorus limited in the main lake. In the north end, it's not limited by phosphorus. It has plenty of phosphorus to grow algae and weeds and everything else. What really limits it appears to be nitrogen. And that's why as summers wear on, warm summers wear on, and we get depletion of the nitrogen sources that were washed in from the watershed, you get blue-green algal blooms, because they're the only algae that do not need, basically can fix nitrogen out of the air. And someone said we have a new member from Fernand. That's exactly what's happening on Fernand Lake. Fernand Lake is very much like our North Arm. And by the way, there's an algal bloom going on it right now. So very similar situation. The other thing the district is monitoring, gives us an insight in the lake. We're looking at Mockin Slough, and that's the Mockin Slough is the area within the sandbar on Mockins Bay. So Mockins Bay outside, Mockin Slough is the area right there up against Myvedon and Forest Land. And we're looking at the east end of O'Rourke Bay as well. Those are two areas we also suspect were inundated when they put in the dike. So far, and I've looked at 4 or 5 weeks of data and graphed it, it looks like their water quality is acting much more like that of the main lake than the North Arm. So that's good news as well. So that's sort of the state of our lake. The watershed, not a lot of activity in the watershed. We're going to talk about the Forest Service component of that. They do have a program called Kootenai Fuels, and some of you may have seen that around your properties up around English Point, and it's also going around the south border of the forest border on the south side of the lake, and they're basically cutting out a buffer, fire buffer. Not really a big impact. We have seen, and Craig Davidson's here to talk about code enforcement. We have seen some about 2 or 3 developments that were pretty bad. One of them was specifically bad, and I'll deal with that later, as far as erosion and sedimentation to the lake. So we have seen that going on in the watershed. we've not seen any big overall developments or anything like that has concerned us too much. So that's sort of the state of the lake and the water. There will be a number of, or the watershed, I'm sorry. There will be a number of, well, wait a minute, we'll go back. I do want to talk about some of the highlights of what the association's worked on this year, some things that won't come up in the talks, at least that much. The real highlights, first of all, we've done a very large public education program with the district, and Jan Wilkins for the association and Marianne Stahl for the district have done a terrific job in educating on boat wake education. Some of you may have seen the cards that have gone out, been put on people's windows. We've given hundreds, maybe thousands of those away. My job is to go down and pick up afterward and find out how many are left over. And people take those things. We see very few of them that get thrown in the trash. And I do check the trash cans down at Honeysuckle. So it seems to be a very effective program that's going on. We also worked very hard to get a 500-foot excessive wake limit for Hayden Lake. We only got 300 feet excessive wake limit. But we are developing, Will right now is developing on our website a complaint. We want to monitor how effective both the 200-foot limit and the 300-foot limit for excessive wake are. So we want to, Will's putting together a complaint registry on our website, and we're looking for substantive information that we can share with the county commissioners. We want to know if these wakes and the wake activities are causing damage or not. And we're asking for very specific information in there, as much as you can give us, because that's what's going to be telling. We're also trying to tool up to put some remote cameras out to actually measure wakes and try to pick up the boat that caused that wake. So we want to monitor those wake limits and find out if they're effective or not. Now that they've been set, well, one's been set for years. Now that one's been marked, and Steve will talk about that, and the other one's been set. I'll talk about what we've been doing with Honey Badger a little later. Everything the association is done by volunteers. Nobody gets paid in the association. And so what we do, it's all volunteer. So we certainly appreciate your dues. We certainly appreciate your contributions, and thank you for them. But we need people to work with us to help us. We learned a long time ago in the association that the federal government, the state government, and the county government were not going to do a darn thing to protect our lake, that we were going to have to do it ourselves. And that's exactly why the association reinvigorated the Watershed Improvement District to do just that. So we have an infrastructure to protect Hayden Lake, but we need folks to work with us to do that. So with that, did Dan Scaife ever come on, Will?
No, I have not seen him.
Well, we were going to have Ranger Dan Scaife of the Coeur d'Alene River Ranger District here, and he just disappeared from sight about 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, and usually that means they sent him off on a fire on the other end of the country someplace this time of year with the Forest Service, which is a problem. The reason we wanted Dan to speak was to talk about the Honey Badger project, but I guess I'm going to have to stand in for Dan, and then we'll get on to the rest of the speakers. Honey Badger is a planning project that the Forest Service is carrying out right now. And the Forest Service used to plan this little timber sale or that little timber sale, or on a little bigger scale, but not very much. Now they plan on huge landscape levels. Honey Badger reaches from the Bunko Divide all the way to Fernand Saddle. Treasure Mountain's actually part of it. So it's a huge landscape. Turns out that 60% of the watershed of the lake, and like I said, the watershed's important because its quality dictates the quality of our lake. 60% of that watershed is managed by the U.S. Forest Service. And this planning project, Honey Badger, is going to deal with that management. They're going to deal with that 60% of our watershed. So you bet we're very interested. We have provided substantive comment in both the pre-scoping and what they call the scoping phase. And when I say substantive, we've gone into the old TMDL documents and the management plans, and we've designated specific erosion sources and specific potential erosion sources on the forest land that need to be addressed in this particular project. And we've also given them substantive alternatives. One, for instance, is don't know how many of you are familiar, but with Forest Service Road 437, you may not know it by that name, but that's the road that goes from the north end of Hayden Lake up past the shooting range, meets the old Ohio Match Road. And it is a poster child for the misuse of our national forests, literally. And so we have just an example of the substantive changes we've tried to drive. We have given them an alternative to that route. We basically proposed they shut that route down and replace it with a much a different route. Problem with 437, it hangs right over Hayden Lake. If you're there during a rainstorm, and some of our board was in early July, it puts sediment right straight into Hayden Creek from it. And so we've proposed they do away with that road and replace it with a road that would cross exactly one small branch of Nielsen Creek and otherwise be completely away from the stream system completely. So those are the sort of substantive things we did. Where Honey Badger is, there are some real questions, and I'm sorry Dan isn't here because I had some real questions for him tonight. The real question is they're proposing to do a huge amount of work on the watershed. So if you look at our watershed, its problem is that it is a very old forest stand. The fire histories show that the last time the Hayden watershed burned was in the 1750s. So if you do the math, it's 300 years, pushing 300 years in a fire cycle that's 300 years old. In other words, fires, you'll get a stand replacing fire like the great 1910 fire, the Sundance fire, if you're familiar with those. You'll get one of those on roughly every 300 years in our climate, maybe pushed a little up by global warming, but that's the ballpark. Well, we're well out on that. I mean, we're approaching that 300 years. The Forest Service knows that. They have a forest that's full of what they call climax type species, white fir, hemlock, and that sort of thing, and not very what they call long-lived cereals, the ponderosa pine, the white pine. White pine, of course, was decimated by blister rust. Larch, those Douglas fir, those species that last over a long period of time, but are more fire resistant. So they've got a big inventory of non-fire resistant and disease susceptible trees and a low inventory. And it's simply because where they are, well, it's really there for two reasons. The forest was high graded. They dogged out the good stuff and left the bad stuff. The other reason is that they're just this far along on the natural fire cycle in the watershed. So there's two solutions for that. They can either let her burn, and that will be real nice for the lake for a good period of time. And it's not in the nature of the Forest Service to do that. And the other is they're proposing some pretty large landscape cutting in the national forest. I mean, the National Forest Management Act allows 40-acre clear cuts unless a case can be made to the regional forester to increase it. Well, they're proposing some, I think one of those things is 1,100-acre clear cuts. And you will see those from Hayden Lake, believe me. So we're very interested. We understand where the Forest Service is because it's kind of an either or. Either you manage the forest or it's going to burn. I mean, it's build up the fuels. The fire cycles are like COVID-19 and the 1918 flu. They're going to come along. They're going to affect you. And the fire cycle, we're just pushing it in this watershed. So the Forest Service has a very, I think they're planning to manage something like 25 to 30% of the acreage in the watershed, and that's pretty massive. What we don't know, and what I'd like to ask the ranger is, how quickly are you going to do this? So that we think it can be done, but it's going to have to be over a long time horizon, 25, 30 years. You can't do this in 2 or 3 years, or we're going to have real sedimentation problems. So what is not answered in anything we've seen is, and we've asked the question, over what time period are you going to do this? So we're tracking honey badger very closely. Like I say, we know where the problems are, and we've recommended those problems to be fixed. With the unknown is, you're going to do a huge amount of operation on the national forest. How quickly are you going to do that? Because of course, if they do it quickly, we can expect a lot of sedimentation coming into our lake. If they do it over a reasonable time horizon, it probably will be ameliorated. So that's kind of where we are on honey badger. I wish Dan were here to deal with this subject, but I've done my best with it I can. So if you have questions about that, certainly send them to Will, and I'll do my best to either answer them tonight or get you an answer if I can't answer it tonight.